Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to this act of worship. We'll call on Ray to come and do the official welcoming.
Well, I guess thank you all for coming. The support we've had from all of you and all those who are virtually here has been a great help and has enabled us to, as it were, get on with it. I'm sure Mike would say to me, to us, just get on with it. And so what we would like to do today is to treat this as a celebration of his life. There's so much that he did, so much he did for us, that we want to walk away from here, if we can, with our heads high and smiling in his memory. So thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Could we please stand and have a moment of silence as we acknowledge a life fully lived, a life that comes from God and has returned to God. We will ask that you respond to the bold print. Jesus said, "Be troubled, believe in God, believe also in me." Jesus said, "With blessed assurance, in my Father's house there are many dwelling places." Jesus promised, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you there myself, so that where there you may be also." Jesus said, "You know the way to the place where I am going." But Thomas had doubts. Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Please be seated as we enjoy together the photo slides for those who were unable to see it at the beginning.
A reading from Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. A time for everything. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. Hear the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, you got me again. I'm going to share with you some of the story of Mike's life, just to give you a sense of how much he meant to us, his family, near and far. Now, going back 41 years ago, my memories of his birth at the Santon Clinic are vivid. His mom had to push long and hard. And when he came out, he was all scrawny and elongated. And I was worried. I asked the nurse, "Is he okay?" And she said, "He's going to be fine." And that truly what he was. He was a real gift from God. His birth signaled a very happy start to our family, because it followed then with Andrew and his sister Claire. He brought great joy and affirmation to me. It was truly wonderful. Now, Mike always wanted to know how things worked and why they worked, so he could build them and fix them. So when we first set up a cot for Andrew, he watched. I'm sure he figured he could pull it apart and put it together again, but he overlooked the need to get Andrew out. We just heard this crash and Andrew yelling. So his first engineering project didn't kind of work out as expected. He fine-tuned his skills over the years, becoming a really handy man to have around when things needed fixing. I got quite lazy with Mike around because he just did it. His tour de force was actually rebuilding a 1955 MGA, right down the last bolt. The only thing he didn't do was actually strip the gearbox and pull it apart. He made a beautiful job of it. He really did. It was absolutely fantastic. He didn't get much road use out of it because he had to emigrate to the USA for business reasons, and so we sadly had to sell it. But if they ever make a James Bond movie in South Africa, that's the car to use, not an Aston Martin. And he went to Wendywood Primary, and he learned to play the piano beautifully, and he was an enthusiastic member of its well-known choir at the time. And that formed a foundation of great interest in music. In his teens, he learned to play the guitar, and recently in Raleigh, that's how they pronounce it in the United States, it's not Raleigh, it's Raleigh, so if you'll forgive me, that's what I'm going to call it. He's just taken on the banjo, and he's starting to learn to play the bagpipes. The tune that we were playing a bit earlier was one of his favorites that accompanied the photographs, the pictures. Now, Mike's mind was very sharp, and he was curious about everything. Sarah had a lovely time teaching him as a child to read, to think and to play cards and games. And once he started school, he thrived on the challenges that came his way, and he delivered outstanding results every year. He was at Redhill for senior school, and during his final years, he did well enough in the South African National Science Olympiad to be invited to the Rio Tinto National Youth Science Forum in Canberra in January 1998, and then he went to the London International Youth Science Forum in July 1998. He actually traveled more when he was at school than his parents. And during his third year, he did electrical engineering at UCT. He participated in a student exchange program with Constance University in Germany. And while he was on the program, he was invited to spend Christmas in Norway that year with his family of a fellow student on the program. And then we had a barging trip in France. We went down the Loire, and he joined us for that trip. And that was very special to us, that particular trip. We had a lot of fun. He was a quiet and reserved fellow. He was very kind and considerate, easy to get on, and he made many friends. And really, I'd just like to repeat that all of you who have heard of his death have really contacted us. Come today, the people who are listening virtually. Thank you very much. It's really helped a lot. He was very considerate as a youngster. And, you have your first child, you get stuck at home for quite a while. And eventually we took the courage to put him in his carry cot, and we went to movies. And we even took him to meals with friends, where he joined in the swing of things by actually sleeping through no matter how late it was. He's always been involved in all our family doings, even when he was overseas. And what has been really nice over the last few years is become good friends with Andrew and Claire, which doesn't often happen among siblings. And it's really made our family get-togethers and something special. There were times when he put up very politely with me when I made a nuisance of myself. When he went to UCT, he spent his first few years at the Smuts Hall residence. I went there, my brother Don went there, my brother Chris went there, I went, and then Mike went, and in fact, Chris's son spent some time there. So we had a bit of a tradition. Anyway, we flew down to Cape Town, and they had a very nice welcoming ceremony there. Wanted to know what his interests were. Was he going to go and see the mountain, things like that? And I got involved, you see, and I had a happy time there too. It was kind of just reliving the past. And Mike sort of, he says, he comes, he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Dad, you can go now." I was dismissed. And then the other thing that he hated a fuss. He really did. And so when he had his 21st, he didn't want a party. We said, what about getting your friends around and doing something? No, he needed to go down, term was starting again. So we went to the Balalaika with some very good friends who'd known him right from the start. There's Pam and her son Gavin were born, she was in the same ward as Sarah, and so Gavin and Mike were born at the same time. Pam and her husband Alec came, and another group of friends of ours, Chick and Jenny, they came. And we were sitting in the Balalaika, enjoying the meal, and when we came to toasting Mike, I said, well, why don't we give him a ring? In those days you had those big kind of bread box type things. There was a Nokia or something like. So we called him. And it rang, and it eventually got through. And I kind of got this grumpy voice saying, "Hey, Dad, what do you want?" And we're just wishing you happy 21st. And he was a bit irritated because when they'd got to their digs in Kenilworth down in Cape Town, it had been all locked up, and they didn't have the keys to get in easily. And there was a terrible smell coming from out the house. And what had actually happened is the electricity had been switched off, and they had a whole lot of fish in the deep freeze, and you could smell it. So he was on this kind of fence trying to get across, and they had this terrible smell, and there's his dad bringing him, trying to wish him happy birthday. So I took the hint. we had a number of really kind of fun gets-togethers during the kind of past few years. When Chris turned 50, I won't tell you how long ago that was, we all went down to Cape Town. Arlene was with Mike then. They were traveling around Cape Town, one of those, those Fiat 500s, I think they were called, and it was open deck, and they had a lovely time scooting around the vineyards. And we ended up, I can tell you his birthday, it's the 8th of August, and 9th of August is Women's Day. And so we had a terrific lunch at the Murati estate, which was, I think, built up predominantly by a woman. And so the men weren't allowed to say anything during lunch. So we had a wonderful time there. Mike had, he did get up to a couple of things which I don't think he wanted us to know about. The one was in his kind of senior school. In those days, people like him used to go off to Sandton City and mess around and kind of do things. And there was a golf there, and I think the idea was to see how many people they could put into this golf, you see. I don't know, Gareth will tell me, about 18, 19, 20, or something like that. And the deal was that they had to ride it around the car park, which was in front of the library. Unfortunately, the South African State Trooper arrived, and he took everybody to jail, but he arrested Mike because he was driving it. And so 1:30 in the morning, get this phone call, and he said, Dad, this time he wanted me to do something for me. He said, can you come and bail me out, please? So I went to the Sand police station and sort of said, look, no, he's okay. You won't do anything wrong. But he was very embarrassed about that. And what was the other thing he got up to? They at UCT one of the year, they all decided, all his friends decided they were going to do this trip down the coast. And, I thought that was a jolly good idea, go all down to all the beaches and have a wonderful time. And the interesting thing about that is that he did not want, whenever I said, did you stay there? And what did you do there? No, it was just the beach. So they must have got up to all sorts of things which he didn't want to share. Recently, I had reason to go to Berlin for a convention, and he was in Raleigh then, and he came across on business and joined us. There was Sarah and Mike and I. And Berlin is a wonderful city now, which is modern in 2018. You get around easily, they've got all the history there. And we spent a fantastic week together, going to cemeteries, I guess. And then we caught, and this was special for me, we caught the fast train, the express train, down to Brussels, and then we went under the channel to London, where we met up with Andrew. He's living in Sussex, and we spent a great few days there just wandering around, some lovely walks where he lives there. He then, the next thing that he did, he went to New York, met up with Andrew in New York, and they showed Andrew around New York. New York was actually Mike's favorite city. He loved it there. Great friend of his, Sklar, has a chocolate factory there, or chocolate. He makes very fine chocolate, so I hope he's listening, and he will send us some. But if you're ever in New York, and you should really, it's in what's the suburb? Yeah. And then I think the last trip we did together, we went down to Cape Town in 2019, and we visited all the coffee shops, and we spent a delightful kind of 4 or 5 days with Chris and Janet, and then he went back to Raleigh. Mike's, he was a cat lover. His favorite pets, well, he only had one, he had 4 cats. He started off with, when he was in digs with Gareth, they got 2 kittens. They called them Jack and Dan. I don't know where those names came from, but anyway, Mike's always had cats with attitude, and that's I think why he loved them so much. We had a couple of pictures there of him with his cats. Dan went with him to Raleigh when he emigrated, and then after he died, Mike got 2 other ones. He called them Voltaire and Victoria. Voltaire was a thug, very big catty, which ended up being called Fat Boy. One of Mike's great friends in Raleigh, Griffin, is now looking after them. So that was one of Mike's biggest concerns, if anything were to happen to him, what was going to happen to Fat Boy and Victoria. So that's been nicely settled. He was, in addition to that, he was a keen sponsor in Johannesburg. He sponsored the wild dogs out in Hartbeespoort in the cheetah reserve there. And then in Raleigh, they have a tiger sanctuary. And he then adopted 2, they weren't tigers, the one was a bobcat and things like that, and he sponsored them. The other things he did there were, there's a city farm in Raleigh, which is one of those kind of places where a citizen can go and help grow vegetables and just grow flowers and get some sand in your hand. He started doing that, but when COVID and lockdown came, that fell away a bit. And then the other thing he did was, I think he was probably a frustrated farmer, because his apartment was just full of flowers and trees. And one of the things he did, he shared a love for coffee with me. And online, there was somebody advertising coffee plants in I think it was in British Columbia, and he ordered them. They sent him 400. None of which actually survived. When he left, Mike, as you know, was, in addition to being a handyman and a brilliant academic, he was, his heart was in developing IT systems. He was very, very good at it. He made magic with devices. We'll come to that in a minute. And I started my own business in 1997, and while he was still at school, he developed the systems, he built them for me, and they don't get me wrong, they still stand, the structure's still fine, but I have updated them since 1997, gone into the cloud and things like that, so, don't worry too much about it. The first, I think, initiative that we, kind of shared with him, he got involved, the company he set up, he was working with Doosan. I think he started with Doosan while he was at university. They had all sorts of ideas as what they wanted to do. And the first company they set up, as far as I know, was called Red 5 Labs. And what they tried to do there was to persuade Nokia, who was the big kind of mobile phone maker in those days, to actually allow them to put the Windows kind of software into it and make it smarter. Doosan will help me there a bit later, but Nokia kept on saying to them, this is a good idea, and they did all sorts of presentations and they raised money to get this going, but Nokia eventually kind of didn't deliver, and so they gave that up, and they started another initiative which they called Device Magic in Johannesburg, and that grew. It grew nicely, but because they were having problems with getting their clients to pay them money because of South African exchange controls, they had to incorporate it in Delaware and then move to Raleigh. Arlene went with him then. She did a master's in law at Duke University, and then qualified to practice in New York, but then had to come back to South Africa because the visa issue came up and she wasn't able to get a job there. And that was about the time that Mike health actually started to go bad on him. He was very dedicated and if he had something to do, he wouldn't stop. And he actually worked so hard, I think, that effectively he got himself into a nervous breakdown, and he developed diabetes, and then that led on to a bipolar condition, which actually eventually caused him to die. So that's in fact what happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. Up until then, they sold the company at the beginning of the year, so that was the plan. They told us, so he did what he wanted to do. He kept on saying to me that he's in the United States, that's where he wants to be. He's doing what he wants to do. We were trying to get him to come back here and do what he wants to do in South Africa, but that was his choice. And he was actually puzzling all year what he wanted to do next, and he came up with actually getting involved in drones. He joined, he set up to get a commercial drone flying license at Raleigh International. He started that, and he was looking at ways in which you could use them to collect data and various applications like that. That's what he was doing. He went to a convention in Vegas the week before he passed away, and so that's what he was up to. So there you are. I can hear him saying to me, "Hey Dad, you can quit jabbing now. Go and sit down." So I guess I just want to say a few more things. The one is that, your prayers and condolences, thank you. We've been praying for him. We've been asking that God takes him, and I'm sure he will. And so I have Mickey. There are no goodbyes for us, wherever you are. You will always be in my heart. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike's sister Claire. Okay. A story for my baby Zoe about her Uncle Mike. The 3 little Welhams. Once there were 3 little Welhams, Mike, Andrew, and Claire. Andrew was the loud, passionate, impatient, and adventurous Welham. Claire was the quiet, strong-willed, and quirky Welham. And then there was Mike, intelligent, polite, thoughtful, accepting, and deeply caring. Andrew and Claire had ideas and dreams that were as ordinary and in a way as stereotypical as your average person. But Mike, oh Mike, he had dreams that were fantastical, dreams that were exciting, hopscotchy, whipsy-whiffling, and delumptious. To quote one of Mike's favorite lines from Alice in Wonderland, "Sometimes I believe in as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." But Mike was not only an inspired individual, he was so much more. He was a top achiever academically, a capable sportsman, a popular person socially, and just so damn funny. Andrew and Claire idolized him and took great pride in telling their friends of Mike's achievements. And so, these 3 little Welhams made their way out into the big wide world. Claire taught little children to read, Andrew protected people, and Mike focused on creating an empire. His number 1 goal? To take care of and protect those nearest and dearest to him. To quote Douglas Adams, an author Mike enjoyed, Mike thought to himself, "Let's think the unthinkable, let's do the undoable. Let us prepare to grapple with the ineffable itself and see if we may not eff it after all." And he did just that. He achieved the unthinkable and the undoable. The other two little Welhams watched his successes with pride and glee, and Mike's success provided the funds to achieve his goal of being able to help out those nearest and dearest to him, his family, his friends, and very importantly, any animal that he felt deserved a better life. With all of Mike's successes, Andrew cheered, hooray! Claire whooped, yippee! But Mike, dear Mike, was the humblest of the three little Welhams. He did not gloat or brag. He did not boast or parade. He continued to make everyone feel valued. He told everyone that it was okay to be who they were or to be battling with whatever they were battling with. He had a heart that cared for everyone but himself. And this heart was perhaps his undoing. For while Andrew and Claire could have fun and forget about the troubles of the world every now and then, Mike would put pressure on himself, think deep thoughts, and harbor a massive sense of responsibility for others. And so, between his bouts of energy, enthusiasm, and splendiferous ideas, there were very real and scary moments of worry, loneliness, and quiet desperation. For you see, they say that pride comes before a fall, but in many cases it is those with the biggest hearts and the humblest natures that leave us all too soon. While thinking busy thoughts about solving the world's problems, it seems that Mike forgot to think about himself. He forgot to have a heart for himself and not just for others. Were we to sit with Mike in his final hours, I'm certain he would have quoted his beloved Monty Python, saying, "'Tis but a scratch, I've had worse, just a flesh wound." And so, my dearest Zoe, there are lessons to be learned. I wish for you to have every good and caring and accepting and humble quality that your Uncle Mike had. But I wish for something that Mike did not have, that you will have the knowledge that you're special, important, irreplaceable, and a joy to everyone around you. For if I could have given your Uncle Mike only one thing in life, it would have been the ability to see himself through my eyes. I would like to end with a poem. You never said I'm leaving. You never said goodbye. You were gone before I knew it, and only God knew why. 1,000,000 times I needed you. 1,000,000 times I cried. If love alone could have saved you, you never would have died. In life, I loved you dearly. In death, I love you still. In my heart, you hold a place that no one could ever fill. It broke my heart to lose you, but you didn't go alone. For part of me went with you the day God took you home.
This is a message from John Bradshaw, friend of Mike's. He was not able to make it yet today. Mike was one of a kind, brilliant, curious, funny. Spark of the extraordinary kind of guy. As students, JP, Mike and I spent nights on the common, looking up at the stars, talking about totally reinventing established industries. We looked at 1,000 crazy ideas, many of which have subsequently become mainstream. I loved that his curiosity was broader than his dedication to finish a started task. Broken clock under his bed in smuts for a year, as an example. It might still be there. I loved that I would leave him coding, drinking Jack at midnight, and find him still there at breakfast. I loved that he was willing to live with me in squalor, then have epic industrial clean-up days in our flat. I love that he was up for reinventing anything, like full contact carpet croquet in Chelsea Mansions. I remember his smile during every conversation, but never on camera. I'll try to question myself like Mike would. I still want to change the world, Mike. I wish you were here to do it with me. John, friend, Smuts flatsmate, and housemate.
There's one more eulogy.
I'm Gareth. I had the privilege of knowing Mike coming on almost 30 years from our first time in high school. And we were chatting, a couple of us, over the last week, Daniel Sklar, Renato, a few of us, and we were wondering if it was all right to bring up the car story. So I'm glad it came up first. It was a difficult thing to have to try and explain to my parents how that Golf got out of the house, and the amount of people we had to call to get there that night. It wasn't so funny at the time, but it was a great memory to be sharing with Mike's friends over the last week from all over the world. I'm with Jack and Daniel, Jack Daniels. That's where it came from. Mike's favorite drink. Jack, unfortunately, there were rescues, and just hearing that story, Jack didn't make it in the beginning. And it was the first time I've seen Mike really properly break down. I got a message from him saying Jack didn't make it, and he promptly turned his phone off, and couldn't get a hold of him for a while. And how deeply he cared. He didn't often let it show, but that was something that he carried through for people, animals, friends, family. He had a massive, massive heart. And with a couple of things that I remember, one of the first ones was when Mike came over to stay. We were in high school, I think we must have been about 14, and we decided to play as 14-year-old boys do. And I remember Mike running full speed into a tree. We were playing 1, 2, 3, block yourself. And Mike took it he had to win. I don't know where he was going. He hadn't been there before. Didn't really know the rules of the game, but man, did Mike take off. And then you just heard this wallop. And sort of wandering around, and there was Mike, and he's a little bit stunned. Fine, we took about a 2-minute break. And the next thing, we started again, 1, 2, 3, block yourself, and you just heard this splash. And Mike had taken off this way first and hit the tree. So logic dictated to him he must head off this way this time at full pace, and he went straight into a fish pond. And from that night on, I was talking to my mom in Australia this week as well, and she fondly remembers that whenever Mike came over, she would bring out the first aid kit, because he would injure himself, whether it was kicking a tree, running into a tree, falling off a trampoline, something. Mike would always need the first aid kit. Gray, you're talking about his love of coffee. I had the privilege of living with Mike 3 times after our school career. And if there wasn't a coffee tree that was growing, there was a coffee roasting, there was coffee beans. Mike never did anything small. So I remember when the 2 things. The first one was he was so excited for himself because he realized that he could buy cat food in like a 15-kilogram bag. He's very chuffed with himself. And the other was that coffee lasted forever. So there was never any food, but there was always coffee. And shortly behind that was Mike's love for overhauling. And if he wasn't trying to overhaul the coffee grinder, make the toast faster, try and free flow a lawnmower, you'd hear Mike in the back room when he was in his woodwork stage, trying to overhaul anything in there to get it more efficient. Needless to say, we went through a huge amount of electronics. You were saying about his MG. I'm glad somebody has a favorable memory of that car, because on one of the occasions, the second time we lived together, he just got the MG, and we were living in Rivonia. And I remember, because I'd got the house, Mike was staying with me. Mike was staying with me. It was a lovely house, a nice pool, it had a double garage. Not one day in that house did I get to park in that garage, because that MG was in there. And when it got to a certain stage of its deconstruction, there was about a 2-week period when we thought we had fleas, because we were all just sort of wandering around, like you're just a bit itchy and you're a little bit, personal hygiene, and you're kind of sniffing everybody, check it's okay. Mike had started sanding down the car, and the tumble dryer was in the garage. And we were all getting small slivers of metal in all of our clothes, because Mike was just sanding this thing down, and it was everywhere, and it was getting into all of our clothes. And but I remember his passion that he devoted to everything that he did, and that was one of his absolute passions. And I think one of the things specifically for Mike that kind of took his mind off what was going on, and what he had to do. He always needed a project and something to do, and we were remembering it, and Mike and I didn't, the last time we lived together, we didn't part on the best of terms, and I've talked to him quite a lot this week about it, and I'm very glad that in the last couple of years we've started to chat again. We had started to chat again. And Mike, in that time that we lived together, was a very big part of how I'm here today and the person that I am. I never really got to tell him that in person, but I've managed to get to tell him this week. There are 100 and 1,000 other stories that I could tell, and all very fondly. And we had some amazing times, from walking the cat, because Daniel used to go for walks with you. It's a weird cat, that. But one of my fondest, I still chuckle about, and I tell people, was when we were on one of our holidays down in Belito, and we were staying at my grandparents' house, and we'd had a massive night, and we were all out, and we were drinking, and we were having a great time, and we'd toilet papered something, and it was fantastic. And anyway, we all got back home, and we sat around the pool, and we were telling stories, drinking whiskey, and eating sugarcane that we cut on the way back home. Only to wake up the next morning, walking outside, and we were all feeling mighty cuck to find a whole bunch of bamboo lying outside by the pool. And Mike and I had been quite happily chomping bamboo for a couple of hours that night, very chuffed with ourselves on how studious and intelligent we were. But Mike was a phenomenal man. He was an amazing friend. He was always there. I can't believe we're here talking about this today. But yeah, he loved his friends. He loved his family. He'll be missed, but the memories and the stories and the things we did together are ones that I'm going to keep telling for years and years. And when my daughter's old enough to hear them, she's going to hear about Mike.
Maybe we can take a pause and just listen to the next song as we stand and stretch our legs. Not all of us are 21 anymore, and we need just to stand and stretch our legs. We can play the next song, and then we'll continue with the other 2 or 3. You may stand and stretch your legs as we listen to the next song.
above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified and laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth, there's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Oh, you were crucified and laid behind the stone. You lived to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above
Thank you. You may be seated. Yep.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Cameron. Friend of Mike's. I had the privilege of knowing Mike through our university career. Actually, I actually met him at that Youth Science Olympiad camp in 1998, and my first impression of Mike was that he was a brilliant man, and a whole lot of fun to be with. And when I found out that we were going to be residence mates in Smuts Hall in 1999, I knew we were going to have fun together. 2 years later, we ended up being digs mates in Kenilworth, at 81 Kenilworth Road. And even when Mike went to Germany in 2002, we stayed in contact, and we spent a fun weekend in Switzerland, hiking up the Swiss Alps. And I was supposed to spend some time with Mike in Raleigh. Thank you for the pronunciation there, Ray. Last year in April, unfortunately, COVID put a stop to those travel plans. And so just this afternoon, I just wanted to take a small moment just to honor Mike with some characteristics that I remember about him, and just some anecdotes to honor him and celebrate his life. And for those of us who knew him in Smuts Hall, his affectionate nickname was Good Pig, not just Welham, but we loved his humor, his insight, his wisdom, and his knowledge. He was brilliant. I mean, who else in his right mind would sign up for electrical engineering, which is a challenging course enough, and then add astrophysics on the side just for fun? And then to top that, finish off your studies in Germany. I mean, that was an inspiration. I think for me, he inspired me just to be a lifelong learner. There was something about Mike's desire for knowledge and just wanting to know more that inspired me. And also just to remain in awe and wonder. I think sometimes we miss the beauty that's around us, and Mike was very passionate. Those astrophysics classes, he used to invite me to the cool lectures when the professor was showing the slideshows from the Hubble Space Telescope, and I'd sneak in the back and just go, wow, look at those photos, they're incredible. It just inspired me with the amount of time he spent learning new stuff, whether it was teaching himself Linux coding in our digs and programming his server on the side, or whatever he was getting up to in the late hours of the evening. But he lived life to the full and was always up for an adventure. Whether it was hiking up Table Mountain or the Swiss Alps, Mike was game. And he became our chief engineer and design consultant in the UCT RAG float, where our residents designed a Star Wars-inspired pod racer. This wasn't just an ordinary pod racer. This thing was articulated, and Mike was the chief pilot because he was the only one small enough to fit in the cockpit. And he had such fun. I mean, it was a fun event. He also was a co-founder with me of the Smuts Hall Brewing Company. We successfully brewed 2 batches of beer. But he was also a connoisseur for the finer things in life. He really enjoyed his wine, and he wasn't just satisfied with tasting the wine. No, he had to make sure he became a Cape wine master and pursued the numerous courses to do that. I remember fondly him sharing his notes from his courses with me, and they would start with the first tasting, which were very detailed notes of the terroir and the quality of the wine, and then by the 20th it was just fabulous and fantastic, and the font was a little bigger than normal. But Mike was fun to be around with, and there was always fun to be had. Ray, you mentioned that epic road trip, Joburg to Cape Town, via what our friend JP called the centre of the universe, Umtuntwini, a little town on the south coast that if you blinked on your way to Port Shepstone you'd miss. But whether it was dodging cows through the Transkei in the dark hours of the night through the mist, or looking over the edge of Orrery Gorge, mountains of Pasta in St Francis, dune boarding down Van Staden's river mouth, or getting lost on the St Francis golf course because we thought we'd found a shortcut, only to discover we were driving down the fairway. With Mike's stealth mode, he had the torch out the window to make sure the authorities didn't see us doing donuts on the greens on the way out, but we always had fun together. There was his infamous parachute kite that we nearly lost Mike to in a southeaster on the Kenilworth racecourse. JP and I having to dive tackle and make sure he didn't blow off down the track. We took it to Hermanus the one weekend, and it was a gentle breeze when Mike handed the kite to our diminutive friend Meg. Fortunately, she was seen 3 meters up in the air, letting go of the kite and dropping down to the beach. It was that moment that I realized Mike had ambitions of being a lifeguard, because I saw Baywatch theme tunes in the back as Mike whipped off his shirt and headed off into the ocean, not to rescue any person, but to save his beloved kite. He was an authentic friend. No nonsense, straightforward. He was kind and genuine. and you could always depend on him. He was always ready there to celebrate with a bottle of champagne if there was a celebration moment, or wine, or 21st. He also looked after our health when we were in digs. I don't know which family member it was, but he somehow got hold of a SAST training manual and decided this was going to be our route to fitness. We had a home gym in the back with some weighted paint cans, and we were doing some proper training. He also made sure that I didn't just waste my valuable petrol money as a student. He got us riding our bikes to UCT, which was fine on the flats until we hit the hill up to UCT. For those of you who know, it's quite a climb. He also showed me where it was a great place to review the breakfast you'd had that morning. It was right on the corner of the M3 and Rhodes Drive. He also looked out for our good friend Stu by helping him finish a few bottles of Jack Daniels. That was their passionate pastime. But he also lived to serve others. You mentioned the Smuts Hall clock, which after 3 years was reinstated. I can validate there was an article and a grand opening ceremony for that clock. Unfortunately, I think it lasted about a month before the students complained that a ringing bell at 9 o'clock in the morning after a particular night wasn't the most pleasant sound. So it didn't stand the test of time, unfortunately, but just speaks to Mike's desire to restore things. And there was the other community service that he did with his friend Stu. This was an anecdote that Stu, our friend in Zambia, shared with me. He said in the early hours of one morning during a study week, while they were in nocturnal mode, there was a car parked on Rugby Road with its alarm going off non-stop. So Mike and Stu decided to silence it. We tried to open the bonnet, but it failed. We ended up just cutting the battery cable. Unfortunately, campus security caught them, took their names, but then claimed they never saw anything and there was no record of the event. But just to end off and sum up Mike's life and this untimely passing, I just found myself reflecting on the question, am I fully alive? And what does it even look like? And I feel Mike would encourage us to remember him with these last few words. Let not fear stop you from living fully. Live a life of ongoing learning. Never stop being in awe and wonder of what the universe holds. Be inspiring, because anything less is arbitrary. Live a life to the full and always be up for adventure. Look for the fun in the mundane. It's normally with those genuine friends. And live to serve others, because there's no greater joy. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Dushan. I was Mike's business partner for more than 20 years. So firstly, just condolences from some of the folks back in the US, certainly Device Magic, GoCams, who acquired us last year. A couple other names just want to call out that I'm sure would want to express their condolences directly to his family and friends: Kelsey, Brian, Tony, Dave, Brett, Peter, and Griffin. Definitely very missed there, and I'm sure a few of them are tuning into the live stream as well. So I had the privilege of working with him for 20 plus years, basically his entire professional career. In fact, the way we started working together is I was at high school with Mike at Red Hill, but we knew of each other but didn't really work together or speak at all. And I had left and wanted to start a business, and I thought it was a pretty ambitious idea, but I couldn't do it myself technically, not even close. So I remember contacting a teacher at Red Hill, and I said, who's the smartest person you've ever taught in the school, ever? And I didn't even have to finish the sentence. She said, Mike Welham. And this was the biology teacher. I didn't even know if he was still programming, but I got in touch with him, and he was in Germany at the time. And typical Mike fashion, I would have thought maybe we'd get on a phone call if we're going to start a business together, but Mike was happy to do everything over email. So for 6 months, we had started a business, signed all the documents, and that was, early 2000s, I think. So there was, e-signature was not really a thing, but Mike was using cryptography to sign all his emails. So that's how we began working together. And obviously incredibly talented and amazing intellect. I've never, and I don't think I ever will, work with somebody that was as bright as he was. But unlike some other people with such vast intelligence, Mike never really was showy about it. He never spoke down to anybody. The amount of times he's tried to explain blockchain to various people, he's really got patience for that too, but he never used his intellect in a way to demean or diminish anybody else. It was a real privilege to be exposed to his mind and how he thought. So over those really 20 years, we had a couple of companies, and some worked out better than others, but they were all ambitious, and Mike was incredibly fearless. I don't think there was any challenge that he thought was too big to tackle. And both of them, I guess, ended up becoming pretty world-class technologies, and the most recent one got acquired last year by a US corporation. So his work continues. I know he's very proud of his work that he did at Device Magic. In fact, so much of his code is still running in 100 plus countries, and I know he's especially proud of International Red Cross as a big customer of ours, and they use the software to gather really critical information about war-torn countries and refugees in 30 plus countries. So I know he was very proud of that. I think, Ray, you mentioned Mike had a lot of interests outside of work. He certainly was by no means one-dimensional at all. I don't think I knew about all of Mike's interests, but some of them that I did know about was obviously most recently the drone flying, becoming certified with the FAA, 3D printing. He had several 3D printers. There was just a whole bunch of hobbies, including computer graphics, banjo. So he was a very, very rounded individual. He continued to be involved and have an interest in wildlife. I think, Ray, you also mentioned the tiger sanctuary that he was involved with in the US, and continued to admire wildlife in South Africa. His untimely passing is a tremendous loss. He had so much to contribute in probably so many fields, not just technology. So that's incredibly sad. I got a couple of more funny anecdotes that I think show Mike's character. The one I'm surprised maybe nobody knows about this, but Mike certainly told me he was on a Red Hill trip to somewhere in Africa, and they'd been driving this Land Rover which had so many miles on it that was about to tick over back to zero on the odometer. And a friend of his had said to him, Robin Carter, please just make sure you tell me, I want to see the thing tick over. And Robin had become momentarily distracted at the critical time, and Mike saw the odometer tick over back to zero, and then 5 minutes later just said to Robin, oh, by the way, it just happened, you missed it. I got to travel with Mike quite a lot, doing 2 businesses, and he had a very specific and peculiar travel approach for long flights. We did many 15, 16-hour flights to the US, and I remember once meeting him at the airport. We'd arrived separately, and I said, well, where are your bags? He said, no, they checked in. I said, okay, but it's a long flight though. You're not going to bring anything with you? He said, no, I have a book. And I said, just that? That's it? I mean, nothing else? Where's your boarding pass? No, that's the bookmark. And he was incredibly minimalist with that, and yeah, he would regularly do 15-hour flights. He would check in everything, including his laptop. He traveled with just a book. So, and he detested any kind of extra luggage or waste or inefficiency. That's why I don't have paper today. I know Mike would never forgive me if I was reading some of these notes from paper. Another thing that comes to mind at Red Hill was, of course, he was a brilliant student. I don't think he had to try very hard. But the science teacher was notorious for not being able to complete the syllabus in time. And Mike wasn't standing for that. And the school had basically proposed that we had to come on Saturdays in the morning from, I think, 9 till 12 or something. And Mike said he wasn't going to do that the syllabus should be finished on time. And he didn't care what happened, but he had done the syllabus, and he wasn't going to attend. And the headmaster at the time said, well, you cannot just not attend school, you'll be expelled. You have to come anyway. So he said, well, I'm not coming to science. And then they eventually devised that he would have to do basically a form of detention, which was gardening, which Mike loved. So he would, when everybody else went to science, Mike would go gardening, dressed up in overalls and a hat, and he would spend 3 hours. I'm sure he did very well. It didn't really matter, but he was very principled about some peculiar things that other people would think were peculiar, and he was willing to take them all the way. And maybe a last anecdote that I had traveling with him, he was incredibly disciplined, And unlike other people, certainly myself, the alarm going off is the warning that in 30 minutes you must wake up. But for Mike, when that alarm goes off, there's no snoozing. I don't think any alarm of his has a snooze. And when we traveled together, we were doing startups, so we were usually sharing rooms. And his alarm would go off, and it wouldn't be a second. You'd hit the button to snooze it or to turn it off, get up immediately and go to the shower. And there would be no snoozing at all. So we once were at this entrepreneurs conference, myself, Mike, and our investor at the time. And it was, like an educational event, and they put on a big show, and we were on basically like a luxury yacht going into downtown Miami. And they had, cocktail reception, then a dinner banquet, and then some party in the back. But we finished up at about 10 p.m. The ship docks back, and there's a bus. And everybody says, well, we're all going out, right? We're going to South Beach. It's Miami. And they're two holdouts that don't want to go out. It's Mike and some elderly woman that didn't want to go out that night. And we said, you've got to be joking. I mean, we're not going to be that long. He said, no, he wants to be ready for the sessions tomorrow. So he said, well, then you better be ready for the sessions tomorrow. So we got back. It must have been 3 o'clock in the morning or something. And we decided to play a little joke on Mike and change, not change his alarm, that would be too obvious. We changed all the clocks and the time on his phone. And knowing that he's going to be so disciplined, so it's about, he thinks he's waking up at about 7:30. It's probably about 5:30 a.m. The alarm goes off, immediately hits it, into the shower. He is a bit slower that morning though. We're giggling from our vantage point. And the funny thing was, we expected him to eventually say, hey, what did you guys do that for? He got down to the breakfast that was closed. Obviously, the sun didn't even come up yet. And hours went by, and eventually said, early start, Mike? He said, yep. And that was it. He never gave us the satisfaction, but he always took it very well. Anyway, so to conclude, thank you for including me in this. I feel lucky to have been part of Mike's life, and obviously deeply saddened by his passing. Thank you.
My name's Griffin, and I met Mike about 5 years ago at this point, in 2016. He actually was a client of mine, and you'll have to forgive the cat that's constantly going to be in the frame.
So if anyone, I don't know how much you can see, very importantly, and Dish will appreciate this is the Device Magic version 1 t-shirt. So this is from when it all started out. I was a little bit late to the party. You guys had already got going, but this is incredibly special to me. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Arlene, and I don't really have a title or connection to Mike, other than my friendship with him, so please bear with me. How do you describe someone indescribable? The people here today know Mike from various stages of life, but it's thanks to Gareth that I met the most extraordinary man who loved me unconditionally and took me on a hell of an adventure. How do you fit all the adventures and feelings into a page or two? Mike was so much more than his numerous achievements and accolades. You only had to spend 60 seconds with him to realize he functioned on another intellectual level. From the Big Lebowski bowling evening, where he kissed me, bad Christmas jumpers in the US, and yes, the dude was still abiding, to his training on the Northcliffe stairs to scale Killy, wearing the Tony Romo jersey at the summit as he had promised, all while coding an app in a tent on the way up for Médecins Sans Frontières. He whiled away hours, almost completely rebuilding the MG at Ray and Sarah's house on Sundays, with Briars and Tiggy to match. And then there was my being totally okay with him already having 2 kids when we met. I became an instant stepmom to Daniel Cat and that other child, Device Magic, that he shared with Dushan and the other stepmom, Anna, Dushan's wife. Adventures abounded, with picnics in Modderfontein Nature Reserve, trips to Kruger and down to the Cape. I have to admit that I was the one that introduced the engineer with his blue button-down shirts and boots to t-shirts and trainers. As the plan was always to raise device magic in the US, both of us were terrified, but we knew we wanted to tackle the big adventure, so we found a different way. Mike was the one who believed I was not only good enough to get into Duke Law, but that they would be lucky to have me. He read and reread multiple drafts of my personal essay prior to submission. And for anyone who really knows him, I had the bonus of having the grammar Nazi on my team preparing. After I got in, I teased him that he must most certainly have bought off their admissions team to get my access. North Carolina instantly felt like home for both of us. We went on many adventures in the US. We were those people taking advantage of the $20 tickets to Cleveland on a low-cost airline, just because we could. Or just walking through Amstead with the most peripatetic person I'd ever encountered. We enjoyed biscuits at Rise, coffee stops to test baristas, and he'd even come through and support my hockey matches, playing club hockey as the old lady at Duke. When my parents visited for my graduation at Duke, Mike made sure that they were taken care of, and we had an amazing bison dinner that my dad can never stop talking about. We lived fully. And those that are closest to me know that I've never been happier or more content than being in North Carolina with Mike. I'd found my place with my person. At some point, something changed for Mike. He never was one who could appreciate his own brilliance, and that brilliance did not allow him any perspective. Mike put others first. Animal charities, his patience teaching people, and the device magic interns that he took such pride in. His admiration for Dushan running the commercial side of the business, and probably even more Dushan's ability to interact with people. Or even when he thought of his friend Stu, sending the HST book on an adventure of its own, and Stu, maybe at some point that book will finally arrive and Mike will make a plan to get it to you. But as others have said, Mike's biggest objective was to look after those closest to him, his friends and his family. Even during his struggles, Mike tried for me and I tried for him. Sitting by his ICU bedside in hospital while studying for the bar, him taking me out to dine while he was still on his peg tube, or flying to Florida in the summer when it was roasting hot and Mike detests the heat, with the AC being set at 18 degrees Celsius all year round. And not to mention the unforgettable trip to Vegas that I took with Dushan, Anna and Mike just before I came back to South Africa. We weren't together, but that wasn't due to lack of love. If only that was the case, that would make this all much easier. Our adventure ended abruptly. Before we could execute on new plans for adventures that we were concocting at all hours of the day and night. To Mike, too much IQ and not enough EQ, which balanced us out, as I have too much EQ and not enough IQ. You pushed me to be my best and helped me see the world in a different way. I'll miss the hours of conversation, sometimes random cat photos with southern sayings with no sensible translations, beautiful drone footage as you pursued a new passion and possible business opportunity, and sometimes venturing to the place you kept buried deep inside. You loved animals, but especially your beloved cats. Mostly, I think, because there was no conversation necessary with them. You love coffee, device magic, all things Apple-related, and I don't mean the fruit. Bagpipes, banjos, Macklemore, bad southern music, being out in nature, walking downtown Raleigh flat, drones, reading anything, learning everything, trips to Asheville, masterclass cooking lessons when you weren't even actually able to eat the food, thanks to the diabetes, 3D printing, CNC machines, friends and family, and mostly, you love me. Thank you for loving me and allowing me to be part of your world. The chance to help you make sense of a world that was too harsh for someone with a mind and a heart as big as yours. Ours was not a fairy tale, and perhaps we complicated things. But I know you only tried to protect me, and I pray you for my love for you, a love I didn't know I was capable of. To quote an unknown author, it was never about fixing you, but only about loving you. Our love and friendship transcended everything else. And while you're no longer here, you'll always be in my heart. Rest easy now.
My name's Griffin, and I met Mike about 5 years ago at this point, in 2016. He actually was a client of mine, and you'll have to forgive the cat that's constantly going to be in the frame. He was a client of mine at an agency I had at the time. We were just colleagues at the point, but I really enjoyed getting to know him. And I would say probably 3 years ago, so late 2017, early 2018, he and I became closer. I was not at the company anymore. I moved on to a couple jobs. Mike was still at Device Magic. And he and I just very quickly became good friends. We talked about all the serious life challenges that we had. We were very open and honest with each other and vulnerable, and that built a really close bond for us. I've been thinking about all the memories I have of Mike recently, like I'm sure all of you have. And there are certainly not as many as I wish I had had, but there's some good ones. I remember specific things about Mike. He was a good man and had a very kind soul. And Mike didn't have an easy go of it the last 3-4 years, and yet he was always kind and always cheerful in his own quiet Mike way, and he was immensely generous. He would get me gifts, completely unprecedented, like dominoes, because he knew we liked games, and chocolate from a friend that owned a chocolate shop, a chocolatier up in New York City, and because why not gift? He would come over to our house. We live pretty close to where he lived in downtown Raleigh, and my wife knew him too, obviously, and we would all hang out, and then she would exit the room as Mike and I started talking about very nerdy things that we geeked out on, and she was just like, okay, have fun, guys. He came over and helped me build a hammock stand, which was very bonding, and something that I was like, oh, it's so enormous and heavy, I'm never going to take it with me. But those are the things that I'm going to take with me forever, because it's part of him. I have to give this 3 minutes, so I guess the biggest thing is to all of Mike's friends and family. I love all of you. I'm here for all of you. I was here for Mike, and as family and friends, I'm here for you. It was a blessing to be a part of his story, a true honor. And it's also a true honor to now house his cats. So here we got Voltaire and Victoria. It's what Mike would have wanted, and that is truly special.
Hi, this is La, and I am Mike's aunt. I have a poem. This is what I like about my nephew Mike. We shared a love of pets, even though it upped our debts. He was such a good cat dad, even when his cats were bad. He loved a joke or two when talking with our crew. His stories were worthwhile and often made you smile. A nicer guy you couldn't find. His heart and family were intertwined. We will miss you, your smiling face, but we know you've gone in grace. Our memories that come through will keep us close to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone for coming to my brother's funeral. I'm Andrew, Mike's brother. I'm currently in UK, which is why I'm not able to be there in person. So I'd just like to dedicate this short video to the memory of my brother. We miss you, Mike. And Mike was as you all know, a very gentle man, very kind, compassionate, generous with his time and with his money, and just generous, always there for others. He had a really big heart for animals, cats, wild animals that had been rescued or been treated in rescue centers. He always had time for, like, I would message him and say, Mike, looking at buying my wife a car. I'm not sure what to do. And he would do so much research on secondhand cars and on this and on that, and completely, just like, I didn't ask him to do any of that, but he would do it just because he was so generous in his time. And he cared about, other people and other people's needs. And so, yeah, we're going to miss you, Mike. I'm going to miss you. I really, 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 I was so looking forward to seeing you in December, giving you a big hug and telling you I love you, and that you weren't battling your demons on your own, and we were here for you as a family. And I'm never going to get to see you and give you that hug and just tell you I love you, man. Last time I saw Mike was in 2018, when my parents and Mike came over to visit me here in England. And before that, we went over to America. We went up to Rochester and saw Lon Kerrigan and Catherine with Mike. But yeah, gonna miss you, brother. Anyway, I love you, and yeah, thinking of you always, dude. Anyway, thank you everyone again, and God bless you all.
Well, I'm JP. I'm a friend of Mike's from university, and Mike was one of a kind, remarkable human being. He was one of my closest friends at university and someone I loved dearly. We shared so many great adventures in those university years, so many conversations late into the night, dreams about the future, listening to music like I am right now, commentary about the present, and wondering what it was all for, what does it all mean. We had so much fun building floats, tying Rick up on memstone, building crazy stuff in the lab, fixing the Smuts clock for so long, crop circling, Adri and John, wine trips, more parties than we could count, and times at each other's houses, strapping a couch to the back of my 1400 Bucky and touring the peninsula while passing drinks between traffic. Man, those were the good old days. But a memory which came to mind as I was kind of thinking about all of this was what I'd like to share with you. It's a book we both read called Ship of Gold by Gary Kinder. And it tells the story of an engineer called Tommy Thompson who learned about the legend of a side-wheeled steamer called the SS Central America that sunk in 1857 with 13.5 tons of gold on board. And this engineer, he made it his mission to find this treasure. And eventually he did it through a process of tenacity and ingenuity, inventing the equipment needed to, see that far down in the ocean and pick stuff up. But one of his philosophies, which Mike and I adopted, was this notion that any good engineer needs to have at least 7 projects going at once. And so it meant we were always dreaming of new things and remaining curious about the world around us. And even now, some 20 years later, I still think of that. Every time I start a new project, I think of Mike and silently try to keep track in my head of, am I letting him down by having less than 7 projects going? All who knew Mike loved him. I've sat here for hours tonight trying to find the words to express how I feel, and it's a strange thing, trying to tell others how you feel about someone who's gone, someone who in truth you've not had as close contact as you should have for the past 18 years as life kind of got busy, yet who leaves such a massive hole in your heart. Man, I've loved remembering all the moments we had. I've loved thinking about the dreams we dreamed, poring over every photo and relishing every memory that others have shared about Mike. But what remains now is this conviction to live my life, to lift my head and to look at the future with a renewed sense of appreciation for those around me, and a resolve to not waste any of my days. And I think Mike would have approved. So I'd like to leave you with Mike's own words to John and I in an email from 2010. I'm happy to start building a horde of ideas with you, but I wonder if the best way forward is not to find somebody with a hard problem that they'd pay good money to make go away and to make it happen. So let's do that. Let's find hard problems and let's make them go away. Here's to Mike.
Could we please stand? Listen to the good news proclaimed in the Gospel of St John, chapter 14, verse 1 to 3. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. This is the gospel of Christ. Praise to Christ our Lord. You may be seated. Just one or two thoughts from the scripture reading. I had only two occasions where I was able to meet Mike. The first time before he left to go and work overseas, and the second time is when he came to visit the family. And I remember our farewell end-of-year party. Mike was here, and I had the opportunity to just have a few words with him. But I am aware the Welham family is a foundation family of this parish. And they were from St Catherine's in Bramley. And so in Afrikaans, hulle sê die appel vat die ver van die boom af nie. And so if you want to know Mike, you know where he stemmed from. And I'm sure that you are aware that Mike's grandfather was also an Anglican priest. And they say Anglican children from priests are very naughty. I beg to differ. I think my kids came out okay. And look at Sarah. She's still here to tell the story as well. A number of us know Mike better than others, but I think we're here to say farewell to someone who was created and made into the image and likeness of God. Each one of us who were created, we endeavor to create in the perfection in which God creates. But God is the ultimate creator. And as brilliant as Mike is and was and will ever be, he is returning to his heavenly Father, who has blessed him with all of those gifts, his talents, and all that he owns. And we just today come and we say thank you to God that he has gifted him in so many ways. And the passage we read today, Jesus just told his disciples, I am going to leave you. And he looks into their eyes and he understands their pain. And he says to them, do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. So often we want to complicate life. And we want to ask questions of, I wonder if Mike was truly a believer or not. There is a new understanding in mission as we just come out of the darkness of the pandemic, where church is reminded our task is not to try and sell Jesus to others. Jesus is the way. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And so whether Mike went to church or whether he gave his tithe to the Lord, it's irrelevant. The way he lived his life, the way he engaged with others, demonstrated that he was conscious and aware that he was created by someone unique. And Jesus further goes and he says, you invented the app Waze. The app is able to give you direction and warn you about traffic officers and warn you about all sorts of things. But you have to listen to that. Jesus comes and says, I am the way. I go in front of you. I don't leave you. I will take you where you need to be. And when Scripture says, when the time is right, God will come and take us to the New Jerusalem. And I believe that it was Mike's turn, and God came and took him to a place that he has prepared for Mike. And in so saying that, there is a place being prepared for each one of us, because you and I too will pass through the shadow of death. And whether we are conscious of it or not, we are here for a temporary time only. And I want us to adhere to what one of the speakers said. Live your life as if today is your last day, and live it to the full. But also allow yourself to take Mike's passing as a moment in your own life to reflect on where you are, both with your Creator, with your neighbor, but more importantly, with yourself as well. Are you doing what you're passionate about? Or are you still doing something to please someone else? And God said, I am with you always, even to the end of time. On one occasion, there was a dad who passed away. And when he got into heaven, he saw everybody standing with a lit candle. And he was desperately looking where his own daughter is. And eventually he found his daughter, but her candle was not burning. And he went to her and said, why is your candle not burning? She said, Dad, you were crying so much for me that every time I light my candle, your tears put the candle out. Please allow God's will to be done. He has come to receive Mike and allow him to be with his Heavenly Father, who has allowed us to share bits of his life, and some more than others, with him. Allow God's will to be done, now and always. Amen. We're going to ask Sarah to come now and do the vote of thanks, please.
It's getting very late, so I'm going to be very brief. I want to thank you all very much for coming and sharing this with us, for celebrating Mike's life, and for sharing your memories with us. We want you all, if possible, to come home with us now and have a drink, have some snacks, and to chat more about Mike and your memories, and just enjoy yourselves. And we hope you will. Thank you.
Sarah, I won't be able to come to the house. It's my wife's birthday today, so I will have my snack at home and my drink at home as well. And our rugby team won, and so even more reason to have a glass and a half. Please stand for the final blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. and the rains fall soft upon your fields. Until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand, and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be among you and remain with you always. Amen. As we leave the chapel, we will listen to the final song.